I do a lot of freelance work, and as I said, I spotted him. I also played guitar, and I've also won some educational awards. So we've got these kind of parallel lives. On the 26th of December 2014, I got on a train to travel to see my football team, Chelsea. I got on the train. I saw a man sitting down with a Chelsea shirt on. I thought, okay, I better go and sit with my compañero. So I sat down opposite him, and he was talking to someone who I was sitting next to. I had the man with the Chelsea shirt in front of me, and I had someone else sitting next to me here. They started talking, and very quickly, the man sitting next to me said, "Oh, Sir John Templeton." He mentioned Sir John Templeton. I thought, oh, I know that name. That rings a bell to me. And then the same man said, well, yes, there was this educational fund in the Bahamas worth 10 billion. And I was thinking, wow, I better listen to this conversation a little bit more. I quickly realised it was father and son. I've got my telephone in my hand, pretending that I'm looking at things, but I'm actually snooping their conversation. Suddenly, the man on the left mentions, he says, when I wrote my first book, I thought to myself, I better check who this is. I look round, so he's sitting next to me. No. No. This cannot be who I think it is. There's no way. This man lives in America, surely. I'm thinking to myself, I thought, I better check. I turn on I had my phone in my hand, I Googled myself, Stannard. I start looking, I'm looking here, I'm thinking, this is incredible. This just can't be true. I'm getting more and more nervous. I'm listening to their conversation, waiting for him to mention his name. Could this be the other Russell Stannard? And I can't believe that we sat next to each other on the train. The train arrives at West Brompton Station, and I have to get up because I'm going to Chelsea. And he gets up. And then I'm thinking, hang on a minute, we've got the same name, we teach at university, we write books, we do freelance, we play the guitar, we've won educational awards, and we both support Chelsea. Now I'm like this, I can't believe the coincidences. I walk across West Brompton Station and I'm standing, getting on the tube now to go one stop. Russell Stannard is in front of me. And I'm looking at him thinking, is it him? I've got my phone in my hand, I'm continually looking at the pictures, I think I've got one chance. I'm going to walk up to him and ask him. I felt a complete idiot. I walked up and said, excuse me, are you Russell Stannard? He went, you're Russell Stannard! You're Russell Stannard! He took my own, he said, you're the Russell Stannard on the internet, I know about you, you're the video man. Yeah. So, we're holding each other. His son is totally confused. He's like, what do you mean he's Russell Stannard? He's Russell Stannard. So we're holding each other like this, and the train comes in, and I try to get on the train with him, and there's so many people around, I can't get on. So I run down to another carriage, and I get on, and I know I'm only going one stop. So as soon as we get to Fulham Broadway, I jump out and come back to look for him. He's not there. Oh. I'm devastated. I can't believe it. I've just met Russell Stannard. My family know all about him. Lots, I've talked about this guy to other, What did I do? Well, I did what anyone would do. I phoned my mum. Mum, I've just met Russell Stannard. I can't believe it now. I've lost him. So I go to the football game. It must have been Chelsea have been playing terrible this year anyway, but it must be the only game I've gone to where I wasn't watching the match at all. I was trying to find this guy. How could I contact him? This was an incredible story. I couldn't find a way of contacting him, but luckily I've gone home that night and I received an email from his son. And his son said, Russell, my dad is a mathematician and a scientist. He is sitting in his study at the moment trying to work out the possibilities of you two sat on the same train. A few days later, I got this email from Russell. I call him Russell Senior. I cannot tell you how flabbergasted. You could have been anywhere in the world, but there you were, sitting next to me on the train. So, of course, now we're great friends. Lovely story, yeah? Now I've got to try and beat that, eh? Oh, God. Right, let me try and... Right, let's just jump onto the main presentation. Okay, so talking about transforming teaching and learning, and is technology doing that? And I'm really, I really struggled with what I was going to present to you today, and I thought, well, in the end, I can only present perhaps what I've been thinking about over the last years. A, what's influenced me, and then B, what I've done about it. And so I'm going to try to divide this talk really into two parts. Talk a little bit, first of all, about what do I mean by transforming education? Why do we need to transform education? And I'm talking about the wider message. All right, we're all in the classroom, we're all teaching language, we know about language. I'm talking about the wider message that's coming from society. It's almost a sort of John Dewey view of learning. So I'm talking about the influences that I've carried with me in my classes that have continually made me think and adapt and change the way that I use technology in the class with my students. So it's almost got two parts. Part one, what do I mean by transformation? Part two, well, what have I done then with technology to try to make it transformative? So you know a little bit about me anyway. I mean, just out of interest, purely out of interest, how many people know teachertrainingvideos.com? Just out of, all right, so quite a lot of you know. So obviously, I think, teachertrainingvideos.com, if you don't know it, please make use of it. It's a free website, and it basically just helps teachers incorporate technology into their teaching and learning. And you can just go on it and click on any of the links, and basically you're going to get a video where I show you how to use that technology. I introduced a little while ago something called 5-minute videos, really quick, snappy videos, where I show you, for example, how to use Google Forms or Google Docs or Edmodo, and those are proving really, really popular. So please make use of the website. It's still doing pretty well, I was saying, and I don't often do this, but that's the number of visitors this month. There's just under 1,000 a day on average. So despite all of the competition, it's incredible the number of people that still come to the website. Which is, so that, hence the reason I kept it going and kept doing the videos and kept doing the newsletter, etc. So, what are my three influences? When I'm talking about transformative, well, what do we need to transform? What are the messages that come in? And I'm particularly talking about the messages that are coming from the sort of the working community. And I want to kind of focus on three things. This whole thing around creativity, and the need for that, and I'm going to try and explain where that might be coming from. The whole thing around collaboration sharing, which I think we all know about, that one's been killed really, and we know, we're clear about that. We're clear that that's part of learning, but I'm going to emphasise that. And perhaps the third one is obviously this need to continually learn. These are the three messages that I think I'm receiving from businesses in terms of what we need to do to help our students in the big wide world that they're going to go into. Let's start with this first one around creativity. Where is this idea coming from? Well, part of this idea really is coming from the fact that so many, that young people have got more and more opportunities to start their own businesses. The world is changing, not in every country in the world, and I wasn't long ago working out in India, and I was in some quite poor schools there, and it just brought the reality of how lucky we are back to me, and the other places that I've been to too. But the world is changing, and there are many, many start-up companies beginning, and many of those companies are based around using technology. So there is a kind of need for creativity in terms of the opportunities that are open to us. And it's really worth just thinking. I was at a presentation a little while ago where it really dawned on me, and I'm trying to make this point. If you think about it, if you imagine that, say, 30 years ago, these companies here they could start because they were making enough profit to start as businesses. But these companies would never have started in the past. These small niche companies where perhaps you were doing an eco-tourism in Greece, or whether you're doing a teacher training videos website. Those types of industries would never have been able to start because they would have cost too much. I mean, teachertrainingvideos.com, I've spent hardly any money on marketing that at all. I've done that through using Twitter, through a little bit of money that I've spent on Facebook, but we're probably talking about a couple of $100. I've been able to set up a Adobe Connect classroom to deliver online courses and to deliver sort of some online workshops and courses. And, you know, I would be in there. It wouldn't have been feasible for me to do that 20 years ago. But it is feasible for me to do it now. There are hundreds of small businesses that are able to start literally with minimum finance. And those companies would have never started. And that's the reason why you're seeing a huge boom in the number of startup companies. And that is where the creativity comes. It's the creativity to see those opportunities, to be able to link potentially, if I think about teacher training videos, and if I think about all the things that are involved in getting that together, the people that I need to link to, in terms of delivering a course, in terms of building up my skills, in terms of having marketing, in terms of engaging with people. These opportunities exist now, did not exist 30 years ago. And that's what creativity is. That's where it is, it's there. It's in those possibilities. Amongst other things, of course, I'm focusing today, as I said, particularly on business. So just jumping back a screen, if you look at that middle one, small and medium-sized business employs 15.6 million people with a combined turnover of 1.75 trillion. It is a huge part of, for example, life in India, certainly life in Britain in terms of job opportunities. Now, of course, not all those jobs, and I'm not saying that all those jobs are based around technology. There's plenty of low-paid jobs, unfortunately, involved in that, but a big chunk of it is. Industries and opportunities that are open to us now that were not open to us before 20 years ago. And that is one of the things that I'm keeping in mind. Can I help my students to be more creative? Can I help them to make the links? Can I help them to understand the opportunities are there for them? That is a driver for me. That's been a driver for me in class for about the last 10 years. A second driver, and someone that I absolutely love, I don't know if you know about the work of Tony Wagner, I'm just going to play a little bit. Tony Wagner basically looks at employees, he looks at companies, he goes and visits them, small, particularly large industries, but also medium-sized businesses, and basically interviews and gathers data, he's written lots of books, about what employers want. Okay, so again, it's that message of what are employers saying we need to do with our students. We all know that education is much bigger than that, but I'm trying to look at the message that's coming from the business world, from enterprise, from opportunities, etc. So we know that collaboration is key in learning. We know it's a facet of learning, but also it's key in business, it's key in industries. I'm feeling it continually since I kind of went freelance and I needed to collaborate and work with other people. I realised what an important point it is. Tony Wagner makes the point a lot better than I do, so I'm going to just listen to what he says.
And that's the way Toyota explicitly expects all of their employees to be engaged. Second skill is collaboration across networks and leading by influence. I came to understand from the folks at IBM that teamwork doesn't happen so much in a room anymore as it happens across the country and even more across the globe. When IBM sets out to solve a problem or to create new knowledge, they find the best talent from around the world to work together on a team that is primarily self-managed. Now, to work successfully on that team, you need a couple of things. First of all, you need to understand and respect differences, apropos of the mission of this society. Differences that are cultural, religious, racial, ethnic. These differences, I mean, these teams that these companies put together across countries are extraordinarily diverse. But secondly, you need to lead by influence. The command and control structure that has characterized so many businesses and other endeavors in recent years has collapsed. So that the person who is most effective as a leader is not leading from positional authority. They're leading rather from their ability to engage others and to ask the right questions. Third,
Okay, I really like Tony Wagner. I really like the point he's making there as well, because he's talking about authority. That's another thing that we really struggle with in the classroom. That one of the things that I think teachers have often found difficult when it's come to using technology is because in a way you do pass authority and control over to the students, and that's a key thing. And I think I found myself as a teacher continually doing that and struggling and trying to understand that more and more. So I tend to find that when I adopt a new technology and use it in the classroom, I tend to control it quite a lot because I want to feel familiar with it, and then I let it go. And that's a continual challenge because I want that to happen. In my lessons, I'm continually thinking about how can I pass more of the control over to the students? How can I make this a more engaging and collaborative activity? So I'm always thinking about that. There may be a starting point, and then I'm continually pushing whatever I'm doing and trying to kind of, to tweak it, to change it, etc., to make it more sort of collaborative and also that the students have got more control of the activity. So Tony Wagner's making a key point there, and I think this is something that Hugh's going to touch on at the end as well, because if you think about it, what Tony's saying is, look, this is what people do in their L1. They're collaborating and sharing and working across networks through the internet. So in our language teaching, we almost need to reflect the same thing in the L2. If that's what people are doing in their L1 in business and work, etc., then that's what they should be doing in their L2 as well. And clearly that is happening more and more. This is a really interesting, talking a little bit more about that collaboration. There are lots of these pieces of research, but just read the first two, because I think this is great news for us, that people who are interested in the use of technology in the classroom. The ability to work in teams, this is what employers say they're looking for. Ability to work in teams, especially with people different from yourself. An understanding of science and technology and how these subjects are used in real-world settings. And I want you to keep that in mind, because it's going to be really linked to my next point, or when I come on to what I try to do with my students. So the importance there of technology, but thinking about it in real-world settings, linking it to their lives, both in terms of what they're doing on a daily basis, but also in terms of their working lives as well. So we've talked about creativity, we've talked about the need to make the learning as collaborative as possible. And I think the third one, and perhaps the one that I've spent, in fact this becomes so interesting to me as a topic, that at Nile where I work, I decided to actually write or help to build the learning autonomy module. I knew very little about autonomy, but I just felt this is such a key thing, it's such a key driver that I need to understand more about it. So I actually ended up writing the module for the master's degree, the program that they run, and at the same time actually studying the subject, because I've written very little about it. But let's think a little bit about autonomy. We know that students in the future will be continually learning new subjects. My dad was a sales rep. He did that all his life. I never remember my dad having to study or learn anything new. He did his job, he did it from when I was born until he retired. He might have gone to the odd sales conference, but there was no need for him to continually update his skills. When I think about myself, it's continually me learning about new technologies, learning about collaborative, learning about networking, going to conferences, studying new things, etc. If I even think about my life, as I taught English, I then taught Spanish, I then taught multimedia, I then taught learning technologies. I've continually shifted and moved on learning all the time. And so we know that this is going to be really important for our students as well. Okay, so that's my third driver. First driver is creativity. Second driver is collaboration. Third driver is autonomy. I'm thinking about these three things all the time when I'm doing my lessons, tweaking and changing them, trying to bring those three elements into everything I do. And then often it's a journey that I go on. I don't achieve it right at the beginning. I'm going through the process of, can I make it more collaborative? Can I get the students more involved in evaluating their own progress, for example? Can I get that creative element into what I'm doing in the lessons? And these are the three drivers. Back to Tony Wagner, because again, he does this much better than I do. And if there's anyone I really recommend you take a look at, he tends to repeat the same talk all over the world, but listen once to one of his talks, because there is a lot of value in what he says, and his books are excellent as well.
We frequently have answers to questions that have not been adequately explored, solutions to problems that a lot of people don't yet understand. So what I want to do today is explore with you a different way of understanding the crisis in American and indeed in global education. I call it between a rock and a hard place, a very uncomfortable place to be. The rock. In a very, very short period of time, we have transitioned from an economy where most people earn their living with these to an economy where if you expect to get anything more than a minimum wage job, you must have a skilled one of these. The skills for a successful career, the skills for continuous learning, and I would argue the skills for active and informed citizenship have converged. They're the same skills. We frequently have answers to...
Turn that off. Okay, so he's making again the point about continuous learning, that we need to develop and we need to learn more. And I think a key part of that kind of idea of autonomy is passing more control to the students so they make more decisions. But also crucial, and this is the one that I think is the hardest for us as teachers, is the evaluation of their progress. I think we find still really difficult to accept that peer review and self-evaluation are key tools in what we need to do with our students. Because if a student goes off and learns on their own, and we're not going to be there all the time to hold their hands, they really are going to need to have the ability to develop and learn and evaluate their own progress and be aware of, okay, this is working for me, this isn't working for me, etc. So for me, the third key driver is I'm always looking. And I still haven't got my head around the concept of autonomy, like I still haven't got my head around the concept of creativity either. In fact, all three I'm continually thinking about, but they are three drivers that I'm thinking about all the time when I'm implementing and making use of technology in the classroom. So basically, if we think about it, we're talking about creative thinkers. You know, we need those. We need autonomous learners, and we need good team players, and we need collaboration. And I want to make a point here. This is, of course, relevant to all of education. It's not just the implementation of technology in the classroom to say, well, is that transforming? We're talking about these in all areas of education. But of course, one thing I've identified is that technology is in there as well. In other words, more and more of what we do in society and the way we live includes us using technology. I'm going to play this little video. I'm never quite sure about this video. I think there is a bit of a message in it. I like Stephen Hecknell at the end. The point they're trying to make is education is shifting. The skill set is shifting. What employers need is shifting. And we have got to, in a way, shift with that. Okay, as I said, I'm taking a wider view here of the impact of what we do in the classroom.
I remember being bored a lot. It didn't bring out the best in me, and I got through it anyhow. So, I was not a great fit, and the system was not a great fit for me. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, that we take all these children and we force them to try to adapt to this really complex bureaucracy that's in the system. The system should adapt to them.
The origins of traditional education lie inside the military to a large extent. They needed identical people, soldiers, administrators, and so on, so they produced the system. When the Industrial Revolution happened, they too wanted identical people in their assembly lines, even in their consumers. They wanted consumers to be identical so that everybody would buy the same things.
So if you look at school that way, if you look at the fact that we process 20 or 30 kids at a time in a batch, just like in the factory. If you look at the fact that if you fail third grade, what do? We hold you back and we reprocess you. All matching the way the factory works. We built it on purpose. And it was really useful for its function. But we don't have a shortage of factory workers anymore.
We're probably at the death of education right now. I think the structures and strictures of school, and learning from 9 till 3, working on your own, not working with others, I think that's dead or dying. And I think learning is
what? Aha. My editing skills weren't very good there, were they? Okay. He thinks that learning is beginning. I want to just stop there just for 1 second, all right? Look, I'm not saying I'm not quite in agreement with that video. I'm not quite in agreement that there aren't still plenty of factory jobs around the world. There are millions of factory jobs around in the world. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is that there is also more and more opportunities for people to start in small business and medium-sized businesses. That is a growing area. That is an area that we've got to consider. And an education system that tries to make everybody the same and often narrowly defines what we need to learn and often doesn't encourage the links between industry, I think that is beginning to be challenged. I don't want to go as far as them, but I think there's some value in the points that they're trying to make. So I try to start there by pointing out three things. Creativity, and that's key because of the fact of the types of jobs that we can create and the opportunities that students are going to have in the future. That's the key. I talked about autonomy and the importance of autonomy, and I talked about collaboration. Those three things drive my teaching and learning. And the point I'm trying to make is that if we make sure that we bring those into our classroom, that when we use technology in the classroom or when we use technology with our students, we're continually thinking about those things, we can make the use of technology transformative. We all know that the use of technology doesn't have to be transformative, and if it's not used in the right way, then it doesn't necessarily transform our learners. That's the point I'm really trying to make, it really does. So I'm going to talk about the sort of three things that I've talked about. One is the activities that I do, and what I mean by this is that when I set up and do an activity with my students in the class, I'm continually tweaking it all the time, because I'm thinking about those drivers, I'm thinking about those three things. Is this a collaborative activity? Is it encouraging creativity? Is it encouraging autonomy? And I'm driving at those three through the activities that I do. I'm tweaking everything I do every time I do an activity with my students. The second point, and I think for me this is the absolute key one, and what this really is becoming key to me, is that when the students are working through and using the technologies, we need to get them to reflect on that. I'll come back to this point. I can't emphasise this point enough. In other words, it's not just enough for you to go in the classroom and do a really nice activity with lots of collaboration, opportunities for creativity, opportunities for developing autonomy, but the students are never reflecting and thinking about how they're developing. That's what I've really noticed. In other words, if I don't signal it to them, the students often themselves go through this process unaware of what they're achieving, unaware of actually what the skills that they're developing. So reflection is a massive part of that achievement, of that helping me to achieve my objectives. And the third one, and one that I must admit I really kind of confuses me, and I'll come back to, is assessment. I'm saying these are three things that I focus on all the time when I'm using technology with my students to achieve the three goals that I highlighted in the first place. I want to take the first one and just chat a little bit about this. So, I noticed when I started doing blogging with my students as an assessment tool back in 2007. So quite a while ago, started using blogging as an assessment tool on a TESOL course that I was working on at Westminster University. And I did it also, and I still do it, at Warwick University. My students, they're doing a teacher training course with me, but I've also used it in English for academic purposes. They write a blog on a regular basis where I introduce them to different technologies. They have to reflect on that technology and discuss how they would use it in their own teaching and learning. And what I noticed is that when I used to come into class, the students were chatting about the blogs. Oh, I've learned to do this, I've learned to do this, oh, this is working, blah, blah, blah. I suddenly realised that if I actually set up situations where I got the students, gave them time to actually do this explicitly, it would help them to be aware of the processes they're going through. In other words, they could be doing something quite innovative in terms of using blogging as an assessment tool, but not be aware of it because I'm not offering them the opportunities to reflect. I've noticed the same with speaking. Some of you know my work. Now, I've done loads of work around speaking, getting students to keep portfolios where they record themselves regularly, recording, and then they've got a whole collection of recordings, say over a 10-week period, and to see their progress. And yet when I ask them, well, what have you learned from this? They're like, well, they're not aware. They're not thinking, reflecting on the process that they're going through. They're often aware of the obvious. Oh yes, this is developing my fluency. They're not aware, for example, that it's developing their autonomy. They're not aware that they've taken control of the learning. You know, I'm getting them to do a blog. I've hardly set any restrictions on that blog, the design, the layout, everything. They decide it. Power's with them, control's with them. And yet when I ask them to reflect on what they've done, they're not aware of that. So in other words, the point I want to make is that point number one is when we're using technology, we need to continually get our students to reflect on the process that's taking place. That way, they will be aware, yeah, I'm signposting you for the 21st century, I'm helping you to develop skills that might be relevant to you when you go out to work. I can explain this as well as a great friend of mine and someone who you know, thinks a lot about this. Listen to Steve Mann he's talking about here when he gets his students to film themselves and create videos. So he's talking about a quite big project, but he's pointing out that it's key that at key moments there's a dialogue. What have you been learning? What have you learned? What do you need to learn? There's continually moments that he's saying you need to build in a dialogue into the process where the students get together and discuss what they are doing. Okay, and exactly the same with me with my blogging, and that when I'm using things like Edmodo, I now have little sporadic moments during the course where I get them together, maybe do a questionnaire, maybe discuss whatever, but something that gets them to really reflect and think about what they are doing. I'm almost sort of saying to them, listen, this is what you're doing in your lesson with me at the moment. I'm trying to make it explicit.
Two things I think are really important. They're very basic, but the idea of structure and dialogue, that if you want to develop a film project, say with some students, having elements of structure in it which allow dialogue are really important. I'll explain what I mean. Let's say you've got a couple of weeks and you want students to do a film project. You're going to give them a camera or let them use their iPhones, their iPads. And if you break it down into stages and say, okay, first of all you're going to do a pitch, then you're going to do a storyboard, then you're going to do a script, then you're going to film it, and then you're going to edit it. That gives it elements of structure. And each part of that structure, you should build in opportunities for dialogue. What you don't want is for all that dialogue to go from that group to the teacher. You want some of that dialogue going across from one group to another. So they could do their pitch to each other, and you build a feedback mechanism, say one positive thing, one negative thing, one interesting thing. So you build into the structure opportunities for interaction.
Okay, I hope that makes sense, because it really is a central point, and it's something that really has been dawning on me. The importance of this, you know, Steve's talking about in terms of a dialogue. And I think that's great, and making the point that it's, you know, it's not about reflecting necessarily with the teacher, but it's just making sure that the students, as they're working through these processes, are aware of the skills, the soft skills particularly, that they're developing. There's loads of ways we can encourage this. I mean, I had a student 2 years ago at Warwick University who did something with Edmodo. He worked on the teacher training course, and on that teacher training course, he got the students, just the teachers, to reflect on the teacher training course. And they did it publicly on Edmodo, and then they could all read each other's ideas. And all in the research that he did, it's not a published piece of research, it probably could be, he did really well, he got a distinction on the dissertation. You know, what the student teachers were saying at the end was, yeah, you know, that process of doing those reflections really made me more aware of what I was learning during the course. And that it helped them to signpost the skills that they were developing. And that's the point. You know, so I've just done things recently where just simply on the blog, for example, just do a little mini questionnaire. It could even be in the L1. If you were teaching in a monolingual situation, it doesn't necessarily have to be in English. It could be, but just an opportunity to discuss, well, what's going on? What have you learned? What skills are you developing? What problems are you having? You know, to get them to understand what is, and then even possibly linking that to a wider context, saying to them, well, how could you use this in other areas of your education? Or could you imagine ever using blogging in when you go out to work, for example? So linking it, building links and giving them a greater understanding of the skills that they're developing. One of the things that I've done is actually send my students on PowerPoint questions that I then get them to answer orally. So I might actually do a lesson And I want some reflection on that lesson. I want to get some reflection from now. This one I've done as a monologue. I think now if I was doing these types of things, because at the moment I'm not actually working with any students, but this was say about 2 years ago, but if I did this now I'd probably get the students to discuss it in groups and record it. But this is where I've done a lesson. You'll know how old the lesson is because it's when there was a talk called War Wisher, which has now become Padlet. But I'd done a lesson, and I wanted the students to reflect on that lesson because I wanted them to understand that they had made a lot of the decisions. They had been sort of proactive in the activity. So by creating this questionnaire that they then had to answer, I was trying to get them to reflect and process and think about what they had done with me. I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of it, okay? She also makes a great comment at the beginning that unfortunately this technology is not available anymore. It's one that some of you know I'm a big fan of. But
Hi Russell, this is Cecilia. Today I'm going to talk about my feedback or reflection on a War Wisher activity we did last Friday. Before I answer any of your questions, I would really like to say that my Brainshark is a great tool for practicing speaking because I genuinely believe I have been recording for this like a million times.
Imagine that, my student telling me that they've done the recording a million times. Yeah? I was delighted. Yeah, great for her. Obviously, you can tell that obviously the student's very high level, right? It's not about the fluency. It's about the fact that I gave her, and I'll just show you that she's basically going to work for a PowerPoint, which is a series of questions that I'm getting her to reflect on the lesson or lessons. It was actually over a period of time that she'd done with me.
And please forgive me if I am not as fluent as you.
She is.
What type of language processing took place while the activity was taking place? Well, first...
So you can see what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get them to think about what they were doing with me and to highlight it to them and to almost sort of signpost it and get them to reflect and think about that lesson. And I go on to ask them questions about how they worked together and did they collaborate and did it work well, etc. And it didn't actually. She wasn't at all happy about her group. Yeah, another group. You know, it's quite interesting the way that I learned a lot myself from the feedback as well. I changed this activity enormously from the feedback that I got from Cecilia and from other students, from Jonathan, another student on the course. The point I'm trying to make is that one thing that we can do is to have this continual dialogue process taking place during the use of work. Not just technology, of course, it should be happening all the time, but I think it's absolutely key if we're going to make education transformative. Okay? The second point I want to make is about the activities. And what I'm trying to say here is that I'm continually thinking about my activities and how I can change them and adapt them to hit my 3 targets. My 3 targets we've already talked about, you know, of creativity, of autonomy and of collaboration. Those are my drivers, those are my objectives. So I'm going to show you a quick activity here I did with a student and just sort of then talk to you how I added to it. Okay? So the activity was student knocks on my door, Russell, I've got to do a presentation on internet security. And I said, I've got no time at the moment, go home, create your PowerPoint at home, which you'd already created a PowerPoint, go home, upload your PowerPoint onto my Brainshark, record your voice, send it to me, I'm going to give you some feedback. So that was the initial activity that I did with the student. I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of her recording, okay, Michelle. Again, I was using my Brainshark at this time, which now I've had to change and use a different technology, but...
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talking about security and privacy of electronic business. I'm Michelle, and if you have any question, please keep it until the end of my presentation. Thank you. My presentation can be divided into 2 parts.
Okay, I'm chuffed about that. You know, there it is. You know, I was thinking about when I taught back in Greece in 1987, and I could have never told my student, you're going to go home, you're going to record yourself speaking, and you're going to send me the link. You know, that was almost revolutionary straight from the start. I'm suddenly getting my students to do a recording at home. And I could say to myself, that's pretty transformative in itself. But what I'm saying is then I would have built on that activity. I started thinking, well, what else can I do to make that activity more creative, more collaborative, etc. First of all, why did I do it on their own? Wouldn't it be better if I got the students to work together and create that PowerPoint presentation? Wouldn't it have been better, for example, if we'd done some activities before the actual recording in terms of preparing a PowerPoint presentation? In terms of what is a good or bad presentation, I can build more and more. I mean, it's about being a good teacher, but we all know that there's a starting point. We do a lesson and we're tweaking it. But how are we tweaking it? Well, I'm tweaking it to make it more creative, to make it more collaborative, and to develop the students' autonomy. In this particular case, okay, so there's this continual process going in my head. I'm trying to achieve those 3 goals through the activities I do. One of the things that really dawned on me, working with Michelle on this particular activity, and on speaking activities that I do, is that so much of the feedback, always the feedback's coming from me. The students at the end of the process want me to give feedback. And yet that isn't very transformative, is it? Wouldn't it be better if I could get them to do the feedback? And then when I think about that feedback, so much of that feedback, really, I could just for a few questions shift over and get them to think about. So I'm just going to open this up onto the screen. This didn't work 100%. We need to tweak this. But what we started doing with the speaking activities that we did with the students is that they may do, say, 10 recordings. And they actually we give them a feedback sheet and they go through and actually evaluate their own work. Then from the 10 recordings, they might choose 1 or 2 that they want to put forward for formal evaluation from me. Again, I'm passing control over to the students. I'm trying to get the students, why? Because remember, one of my goals is to develop student autonomy. What is key to a student autonomy? Their ability to evaluate their own learning. So shift it over to them. Now, it worked and it didn't work. I realised that this is a process. But for example, questions around the slides. I don't need to give that feedback to Michelle. I can get her to think about it. That's more cognitive. It's going to develop her autonomy. So instead of me giving that feedback, get her to do that. Give her a series of questions to think about. What about the process? This was too much. I now realise when I do this, I need to choose a particular area that I would cover in each stage. But again, she does her recording. Instead of me then giving her feedback, no, I give her a sheet and I get her to think about the answers to these questions. I'm shifting autonomy, I'm shifting responsibility over to her. It's not me. That is more transformative. It's not me now, the guru, standing at the front telling them yet you're wrong or right about a particular lesson. The recordings themselves, obviously there's going to be aspects that we're going to have to pick up on. I might listen to them all and give them some general feedback about some of the language. But what I'm just trying to say is that we, through these processes, through tweaking our activities, we can help to achieve these 3 goals. Okay? So that is what I did with Michelle. I kind of introduced this idea of, and I'm doing this more and more, of getting the students to actually evaluate their own work. I was particularly influenced by someone called I.C. Lee, who I know writes in the ELTJ, because she's done this with writing. The students go through a writing process. They do 4 or 5 different essays, and then they choose 1 or 2 that come forward for formal assessment. But the students are evaluating their own work. And that, for me, is transformative. That's going to help me to achieve one of these 3 goals that I'm pointing out. And then the third one is assessment. Assessment really is the one I've used technology as part of my assessments. We need to align assessment. When I see the work in America with the flipped classroom, I'm often quite surprised that I hear that schools are flipping their lessons, and yet the assessment's the same. And I can't quite work that out. How can that be? Because if you flip your lessons, you'll develop another skill, and your assessments need to reflect that. And I've been particularly influenced by, particularly doing work that's shifting nearer and nearer to what I call an e-portfolio. In other words, building that up as a record of the students' learning. Because that in itself actually helps me to achieve my objectives. I'm going to play a video of Teresa McKinnon. She is a real expert in using e-portfolios, and she'll do a much better explanation of what we can do with them. But for me, e-portfolios are key. Trying to align the assessments to make sure that if I'm going to bring technology into my teaching and learning and tweak my activities and try to get the students to become more autonomous, at the end, that is also what I'm evaluating as part of the evaluation process. And I think at the moment there's often quite these are not aligned very well. They never have been in language teaching, have they? We're teaching a lot of speaking activities in the class, developing students' oral skills, and then find that, you know, in lots of countries they still don't have an oral exam at the end of their course. But let's just listen to Teresa.
So the e-portfolio project actually counts for 20% of our students' assessment. It uses an integrated tool within our virtual learning environment, which is called Mahara. And the students, as they start their language learning, are encouraged to capture and document the sorts of activities that they have done and the learning that they have put around them, their reactions, and to use that reflective space to think about the learning events that have happened to them and the resultant actions that they've taken. And over a period of 2 terms, to look at and look back over their learning and think about the strategies they used for learning and whether or not they were effective. So this brings analysis, critical thinking into the learning process. Our learners may be learning Chinese, Japanese, German or French, but ultimately they wish to become part of the workplace where possibly employers may want them to use a different language. So we want them to connect with the nature of the skills of language learning that they can then transfer and to collect transferable skills for different situations.
I mean, she's already...
So the e-portfolio project...
She's really sort of said it for me. Again, you see the point there she's making about assessments and how those assessments help the students through that process to signal the skills that they're developing that may be appropriate to their working lives. And that's why I think those 3 things have been driving me. A, tweaking the activities. B, thinking about how I can make sure there's plenty of reflection through the lessons that I do with my students so that they're aware of the skills that they're developing. This doesn't have to be in technology. Obviously today I was talking about technology, but it could apply across the whole of teaching and learning. And I forgot my 3rd point now. Right, so and the point that she was making there in the e-portfolios was that she's continually trying to get the students to reflect and think about these skills and think about how they might apply it to the wider world. Okay, so that is the 3 points that I want to make today. That first of all, yeah, of course we know that, you know, technology is impacting on teaching and learning, but I think it can do a better job of that. I think that if we change and adapt our activities and continually change and adapt them with those 3 goals in mind, that's going to make sure that our teaching and learning is more transformative. If we bring a reflective process into our teaching and learning, that is going to make teaching and learning more transformative. And if we make sure the assessments align with what we're teaching our students, that also is going to make the teaching and learning more transformative. My conclusion is technology is playing a role in transforming learning, but by thinking about the activities we do, offering opportunities for reflection and aligning assessments, it will be much more transformative. If you go to Videos for All, to make the points, I know that Joel's going to be doing a presentation. It's a project I've worked on. I'll mention that as because I think you're presenting next, aren't you? And on Video for All, there's lots of examples of the sorts of things that I'm talking about in terms of the types of activities we've done with our students to kind of introduce these 3 goals. I hope that makes sense to you. I'm not as nervous now because I'm finished. Questions, we're really tight, aren't we? I think we've got a couple of minutes. Anyone got any questions before we... Yeah, go on.
Can I ask you about autonomy? My understanding is that autonomy started as a political project within the European Union, and so it's something that we now see as kind of innate or an obvious good or that. But can we be sure that we're not just shifting from a style that favoured certain types of students into a style that favours certain other types of students and leaving some people behind?
Yeah, I mean, right, I'm struggling with all this. As I said to you, I've done this course. I'll say 2 things about autonomy that I feel. There's almost 2 aspects of it. I definitely feel there's a role for making sure, actually, especially when students are low levels, actually giving them the tools, making them aware of what they're offering them strategies and places to access learning. I think that is one aspect of it, and I think some people try to deny that exists, but I think we almost in a way have to sort of teach people to be autonomous slightly. How we do that, we can be we don't have to be so explicit, we can offer students opportunities and often show them different strategies and get them to think about autonomy. But the other part of autonomy is about relinquishing control. And that's at all levels of the decision. That could come to the syllabus, the form of assessment, what we're going to learn today, how we're going to learn, how we're going to organise our classes. That aspect is the most interesting part of it. Because if you think about what Tony Wagner was saying, he was saying, look, authority in the future will not come from an authoritative figure, it will come from the initiative you show, etc. And I think that is the message that slowly we've got to show to students.
But rather than being a universal good, that there are some people it suits and some people it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that to a degree. I agree with the point that you're trying to make there. I do agree with that. But I do think as a skill, it is a universal good, and that we've got to try to highlight and make students all. I mean, any student that's going to become a good language learner is to some degree going to be autonomous. So we've got to encourage autonomy.
Just a question, like, there's a huge difference on a practical level between an elementary class and an advanced class.
Yeah.
The mechanics alone.
Yeah.
And the vibrancy and the creativity that's available with the advanced class compared to the elementary class. And you know, you talked about autonomy and authority.
Yeah.
The elementary class, in one sense, whether it's reflecting the teacher or reflecting the reality of the class, is so dependent on you as the boss and looking for your approval and all that.
Oh no, definitely, and and I think that I'm just trying to make out that these are goals that I'm aware of there, and I'm trying to achieve them through the lessons. And certainly, if you're teaching lower levels, of course they're going to hang on to your every word. That is the part of the process.
But the reality is that we should be giving them autonomy as well, because they're, I was teaching a woman who had spent 30 years in the civil service in Spain. And her life experience was huge.
Exactly, yes.
And she held down a good job and a high job within the civil service.
The point I'm trying to make is that those are drivers that I'm aware of. Those are three drivers that have pushed the way I've used technology in the classroom. They've influenced all my teaching and learning. How much you can achieve at any one given moment will depend entirely on the context that you're working in, the level of your students, the nature of the school, the rules of the school, etc. All I'm just trying to say is that to make learning transport, if technology is going to transform teaching and learning, then we need to be always thinking about those three goals, because I think they are at the heart of transformation. That's the point I'm trying to make. But the point is very valid. And of course the context you're working is going to be absolutely,